And we are back with District Attorney General for Sullivan County, Barry Staubus. And we've been talking about the opioid addiction that is facing our nation, not just Tennessee, but in Tennessee, we've gotten a stat that's really not a proud one to have, and that's being the second highest rate of opioid addiction in the nation, and that's staggering.
It is staggering, and some other statistics that are out there, and there's so many, and I won't recite them, but I think one of the most important is that we now have more overdose deaths in Tennessee than we have car wrecks, deaths from car wrecks. And the other thing is the new statistics came out for 2016, and there's been a 12% increase in drug overdose deaths in Tennessee. That gives you an idea, of just how many deaths. And again, the Department of Health says for every death, there are probably 15 people that overdose that survive. So that just tells you that this is an extensive problem that we have.
Right.
And the numbers just keep growing.
And I think the one that surprised me is that there are more people dying from opioid overdoses than of AIDS.
Yes, that's true. And we know how bad the AIDS crisis is. We know how devastating it is. Well, there's more than that. And the other thing that I've been told by the health department here in Sullivan County, that we're on the cusp of an HIV, hepatitis C epidemic. And why is that? Because once people become addicted to opioids, they become intravenous drug users, either through the opioids that they're receiving or through the heroin and the fentanyl. So as bad as the HIV numbers, we have more deaths, but we're also driving the number of people that are infected with these diseases up because of this epidemic.
What kind of feedback do you get from people that you have to deal with that are opioid dependent?
The people that have affected me the most are the family members that come and talk to me and tell me the impact it's had on their life. Many times they tell me a story about a son or a brother or even a husband or a family or a neighbor, a friend. And they tell me about somebody who was fairly productive in their life. They were successful. They had a home. They were they had a loving relationship with them. And then they saw that they got addicted to these drugs, and then they lost their jobs. They lost their marriage. They would steal from their neighbors. They would steal from their friends. They would commit crimes. They would get behind the wheel of a car impaired, and they saw their lives just evolve. And they would see, eventually it's going to be in prison or jail. And the stories that really impact me is just the loss of the quality of life. That when one person dies, it doesn't just affect them, it affects their whole family. And when somebody steals or commits a crime because of drugs, it didn't affect the victims of the crime. And when people basically lose their lives, they're alive, but they're not working, they're not being responsible, they're not being productive, that affects everyone that cares about them, has contact with them. I've even talked to employers that say that it's very, very hard to get people that pass drug screens now because it's so prevalent. Mm-hmm. So it's spreading through it's really a dark underside to our community. Those are the stories that impact me that you can't put numbers on. And then when also, I've been over to the Niswonger Center, and I've been to Holston Valley, and when you go to the NIC units and you see these babies, the first sensation they have in their life is being addicted to drugs, and they're high on drugs, or they're in pain and withdrawal, and they're screaming, and they have all these complications. And you think about what is their life going to be like. They're going to have short-term and long-term cognitive, emotional, and intellectual problems. And when I go to those, and I talk to those nurses, and I talk to those doctors, or I talk to those family members that maybe want to adopt or put them into their care, you see it's affecting the real quality of life of Sullivan County. What are we going to do with the generation of people that don't work or are addicted to drugs? What are we going to do with the generation of kids that from the get-go, from the very moment of birth, have every disadvantage you can imagine? I'm not saying we can't overcome those, and we have to work hard and we have to fight, but basically, if employers can't hire people, educators have time educating this generation of drug-addicted babies, and crime spikes, it's not the kind of community we want our kids to be raised in, and it's not the kind of community we want to live in. And that's the real impact of opioids that I have is I sit around and talk to people or I meet people and they tell me the stories of their life. It's not some abstract study, it's not a statistic, it's one-on-one stories about what happened to them and how drugs, and none of them tell me a happy story.
Right.
Every story is of loss and destruction.
And the thing about it is, it's like, if this generation continues in the path that it's going, the next generation, we're going to still have those same problems because of the addiction being passed on.
That's why we have to really address it in a comprehensive, substantive way. Band-aid solutions are not going to work. Our legislators are going to have to step up and really make tough decisions and pass meaningful legislation like we've already talked about. We're going to have to expand rehabilitation facilities, and as a society, we're going to have to quit expecting these drugs to have some miraculous effect on us without, bad consequences like addiction. And as a society, as a group of people that are out here hear about the problem, we need to let our voices be heard to the politicians and the legislators. But we also need to be involved. It might mean giving to the community. It might be going and volunteering to hold one of these NIC babies. It might be giving to rehab. It might be a volunteer. It might be, educating your children to the extent of this problem. So those are the things that we have to do individually and collectively. And if we don't, if we just sit back and say we're just going to let it go, there's nothing we can do and put our hands up, this problem will get worse. Mm-hmm. And the quality of life for Sullivan County and Northeast Tennessee is going to be worse for it. And that's the bottom line.
We talked about opioid abuse and that sort of thing, but there's also the problem with fentanyl. And that is a dangerous drug that is also killing people on a daily basis.
Every place there has been an OxyContin, oxycodone opioid problem, right behind it. And that's one of the things outlined in the book Dreamland. Everywhere heroin and fentanyl come. Fentanyl is like 50 to 100 times more powerful than oxycodone. And just mere contact with it can cause dire circumstances. Drug sniffing dogs sniffing it can kill them. I mean, this is a very powerful drug, and what we're seeing and what I'm seeing in the autopsies now are more and more people using fentanyl and heroin. And heroin, the kind of heroin that's coming in is far more pure than what was in the 60s and 70s. And that means when people take it, they don't have the quality control expectations they do from a pill. The variety, the strength, the purity of fentanyl or heroin varies from dealer to dealer. And that means the risk of death is up, the risk of infection through intravenous drug is up. It also means that much of this is marketed by organized crime. It means organized crime from other areas are coming into our area and marketing this just like a business. It's profit and they're making money. So, and many times they target places in which there is an opioid addiction because they know they've got already a group of customers that are ready to be exploited.
Now, is fentanyl available on the internet, or is that how they're getting it? Or
they're getting it. They're getting through the internet, but they're also getting through the traditional means of organized crime, of gangs.
Right.
From Atlanta and from Detroit, we've seen it, and also through the internet.
This is very dangerous for law enforcement, especially, and for those who go in to
Right.
try to observe this, because does it stand out any different than any other thing?
Matter of fact, it's hard to recognize it as fentanyl, and that's one of the dangers. Usually we get the information from the people that have it, but often it's mistaken for some other drug until we get an analysis of it or there's a toxicology report done in the autopsy. We don't even often know it's fentanyl. That's why we're going to have to go to a lot of extensive training and safeguards with law enforcement so they don't endanger their lives when they collect these drugs at a death scene or a crime scene or at a drug bust, that they come in contact with this and they have an unfortunate reaction to it. And so that's another element of this whole problem. It's another dimension of danger and problems that we encounter, and cost.
Right, and I know some agencies have stopped field testing because of
exactly.
the dangers of this
Right.
fentanyl.
Right, and we've gotten guidelines and memos from the TBI about how to handle it, how to package it, and a lot of officers are being trained on how to be aware of it. But you know, sometimes even the best trained officer can come upon a situation like fentanyl and be exposed to it with dire circumstances. So it's just another risk, another problem, another cost, another consequence of this whole opioid epidemic.
Now, in the last minute and a half we have here, basically, what would you like to see done that needs to be done right now?
Well, as I outlined, I think there needs to be some legislation. And one of the things I outlined, I think we need to look at some way to narrow the availability and the basically the criteria which somebody can get it and limit the days. I think that needs to be done. I think the database needs to be a real-time database where doctors and pharmacists will dispense that information and disseminate that information so that drug seekers can get multiple prescriptions. I think the other thing is that we need to increase the punishment for fentanyl because it is so dangerous. And I think that we need to also punish people that furnish the drugs unlawfully. I'm not talking about doctors, I'm talking about people on the street that give Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4 drugs to people and they die as a result, and be able to punish them to deter it. I think we're going to have to provide more money for rehabilitative centers. We're going to have to expand drug courts, and that we're as a community going to have to change our mindset about drugs, that we don't need these drugs and we should be educated about it. And I think we're going to have to build an awareness in the community to stimulate these changes.
Well, I appreciate you talking to us about opioid abuse and then, of course, the fentanyl. And we need to really watch everything that we do to make sure that we're making our community safe.
Thank you.